Willow Creek lay under a thin veil of drizzle, street lamps glowing like small moons above quiet asphalt. Officer Daniel Hayes guided his patrol car along the familiar route, the steady breath of the engine matching the slow rhythm of his thoughts. 3 years of evenings like this had not dulled the ache that arrived whenever the road curved past the old railway tracks. Memory rose anyway, insistent and bright. A black and tan shadow sprinting over wet grass. A warm weight leaning against his leg during long report. A thump of a tail that had once set the whole squad room smiling. Sam had been partner and compass and silent guardian, and the space he left behind still felt like a room with the lights turned off. The radio murmured names and numbers he barely heard. He rolled past the crossing and saw motion at the edge of the beam. A dark shape flashed across the lane. Tires hissed. The car shuddered to a stop. For a breathless second there was only rain and the sharp knock of his heartbeat. Then the shape resolved into a dog standing at the roadside, soaked and still, eyes reflecting amber light like twin embers. He stepped out to the smell of wet metal and cold earth. The dog held its ground, muscles taut, fur slicked to a strong frame that stirred a familiar ache in his chest. The head tilt, the squared stance, the gaze that measured and waited rather than pleaded. Every detail collided with memory until he could barely swallow. Sam, the thought came, vivid enough to sting. Not a ghost but an echo so precise it felt impossible. He moved slowly, palms open, voice low and steady without the crutch of words. The dog's breathing fluttered. A pause. 2 hesitant steps. Close enough now for Daniel to see the rough band of leather at the neck and the oval glint of a tag beneath the streetlight. His fingers found the collar. Metal pressed cool against his skin. He turned the tag and felt the ground tilt beneath him. Sam Hayes. The engraving was shallow from years of thumbprints and weather, letters softened but legible. On the back lay an address he had not spoken aloud since the day he left that house and its quiet backyard. The same house where a small stone marker rested under an oak, where a collar and a tag had been lowered into the earth with the care one gives to something sacred. The dog leaned into his hand with a soft exhale, as if the decision had been made on both sides. Daniel wrapped his spare jacket around the shivering body and opened the passenger door. The dog hopped in with cautious ease, paws leaving wet commas on the mat. Inside the car the smell of rain gave way to a faint scent of cedar and dog, a scent that once meant comfort and duty and coming home at dawn. Headlights stitched the road back to the precinct. Neon washed across the windshield in brief colors as he turned onto Main, then into the lot where the squad cars rested in orderly rows. Inside, the station hummed with the ordinary clatter of keys and the soft call and response of dispatch. Daniel carried the dog past curious glances and set him on an old blanket near his desk, the fabric swallowing water in dark blooms. The dog's eyes never left his face, watchful and unreadable. He raised his phone and captured the tag in a tight frame. The photo felt like proof he would not believe otherwise. He sent it to a number he still knew by heart. The reply came fast and sharp. A question that did not need punctuation to carry disbelief. That tag was buried. That tag was gone. The room seemed to tilt again, the way it does when a long hallway suddenly looks like a painted backdrop. He opened his laptop and chased facts because facts were anchors. Microchips, databases, intake records. The quiet beep of a scanner passed along the dog's neck and returned a number that tethered the animal to a name he did not expect. Shadow. Registered to an elderly woman 2 towns over. A recent veterinary entry marked the dog as healthy. 6 years in her care. The math slid into place like a lock clicking. 6 years since adoption. Nearly 6 since the stone under the oak had been set. Calls were made. A voice at the other end trembled with relief and worry as she confirmed that Shadow had vanished days earlier. She loved him. She wanted him home. She did not know how a stranger could be holding a tag with another name on it. She had adopted the dog from a shelter after a storm, she said. He had arrived thin but sturdy, carrying a calm stubbornness that felt older than his years. The station emptied in small waves as midnight pulled at the edges of the shift. Daniel stayed. The dog dozed. He pulled out photos from a folder he told himself he had kept for practical reasons. There were images of tracks in snow, paws pressing neat signatures over white. There was Sam on a bench seat, ears pricked toward a distant siren. There was Sam at rest, eyes like winter honey, muzzle on Daniel's knee during a dreary overnight stakeout when the world felt trimmed to a circle of dashboard light. A quiet sound drew him back. The dog had pushed closer, chin resting where Sam's had often rested. The contact was simple and entire. A cylinder in his chest loosened slightly, letting air in places that had been locked. Dawn grew at the edges of the windows, a pallor that turned staplers and file folders into small silhouette. With morning came decision. He would return Shadow to the woman who had loved him for years. But first, a stop he had avoided for too long. The house on Matthew Street waited with its garden swallowed by neglect. The oak leaned like a slow sentinel over a square of ground that memory mapped perfectly. Partner, protector, friend. The stone spoke in 3 lines that always found his ribs. He knelt. The dog stood beside him and fixed his gaze on the marker with the quiet gravity of someone who understands that certain places are doorways. Wind threaded through wet leaves. Somewhere a train made a far soft thunder. For a long moment Daniel let stillness do the speaking. Grief did not stab now. It unspooled like a long ribbon, and at its end sat a simple truth. Love had not left. It had changed rooms. Back in the car, the new name and the old name rode together. The road to the cottage wound past fields rinsed by the night's weather. Wildflowers lifted their bruised heads. He did not know what waited beyond the next turn. He only knew that the story had moved again after years of standing still, and that the movement was carrying him toward something he could not yet name. He imagined the cottage and the garden and the woman with kind eyes. He imagined a shelter ledger with a date that overlapped the date on a stone, a storm that scattered objects and beings alike, a tag that had traveled farther than sense could explain. He imagined a bridge between past and present built not of reasons but of recognition. Then he stopped imagining and looked at the dog breathing slow in the passenger seat, amber eyes closing, chest rising and falling in even tides. A life. A mystery. A second chance arriving wet and shivering in the rain. The turn came, and the cottage appeared, modest and bright under thinning clouds. A door would open. A voice would break. A hand would touch the tag that should not exist. Answers might not come. Meaning might. He parked and rested his palm on the warm curve of a shoulder that had already begun to change the shape of his days. The gravel crackled beneath the tires as Daniel eased his cruiser into the narrow driveway. The cottage stood quiet and small, its white paint weathered by seasons, a shawl of ivy climbing across the porch. In the garden, wildflowers bowed under drops of last night's rain, their colors muted in the weak morning light. A thin curtain shifted at the window before the front door opened. An elderly woman stepped out wrapped in a knitted shawl, her frame fragile but her eyes sharp with recognition. Shadow leapt from the car before Daniel could react. His paws landed soft on the wet path as he bounded toward the woman. She fell to her knees with a gasp that split into a laugh and a sob. Her arms circled the dog's neck, fingers clutching at wet fur like she might never let go again. Shadow whined in relief, burying his muzzle against her shoulder, but even in that embrace his eyes flicked back to Daniel as if to confirm permission. Daniel's throat tightened. He had prepared himself for this reunion, had told himself that Shadow belonged here, not with him. Yet something in that look, that brief hesitation before the dog settled into her arms, carved deep into his chest. It was loyalty split between two homes. "Thank you," the woman said, rising with effort, her voice breaking. "I thought I had lost him forever." "There's something you should see," Daniel replied, his tone careful. He pointed to the tag still hanging from Shadow's collar. Her hands trembled as she touched the metal, turning it over. Confusion drained the color from her face. "This doesn't belong to him," she whispered. How did he get this?" Daniel told her. About Sam. About the grave under the oak tree. About the day the earth closed over a collar and a tag that should never have seen light again. The woman listened in silence, the lines of her face tightening as if each word pressed a weight she could not lift. "I adopted Shadow from a shelter after the hurricane 6 years ago," she finally said. "They called it Golden Paws. He came in with nothing. No chip, no collar, no tag. Just a frightened body and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. I had no idea. 6 years." The number pressed cold fingers around Daniel's heart. Sam had died 6 years ago, on the very night rain lashed against the windows of his old house, thunder splitting the air while he dug a grave with trembling hands. Time had marched in equal measure for both stories, as if fate had braided them together without consent. Daniel asked about the shelter. She nodded slowly, gave him the name, even the number written on an old scrap of paper she kept in her knitting basket. "They save so many," she said softly. "After the storm, they took in hundreds. Shadow was one of the lucky ones." The dog had curled beside the fireplace as if it were his rightful place, amber eyes following Daniel with the same unyielding attention Sam had once given. The sound of wood settling in the stove filled the silence between breaths. Daniel could not shake the feeling that this cottage was not an ending but another doorway. "May I borrow him?" Daniel asked quietly. "Just for a while. To follow this trail." The woman hesitated, her hand stroking Shadow's head in absent circles. Then she nodded, though her eyes shone with reluctant surrender. "He's always been special," she whispered. "Like he carries pieces of every person who ever loved him. If there are answers out there, maybe he's the only one who can show them." Daniel thanked her, the weight of both gratitude and guilt heavy in his voice. Outside, the air smelled of wet earth and roses just opening to the sun. Shadow trotted beside him willingly, his head lifted as though he knew the path ahead mattered. Daniel opened the passenger door, and the dog leapt in, tail thumping once against the seat. As he drove away, the cottage shrank in the rearview mirror. Ahead lay Golden Paws, and with it, a chance to untangle a story that had begun in rain, carried through storm, and buried itself under the roots of an old oak tree. Answers waited there, perhaps not the ones he wanted, but the ones he needed. The dog shifted, curling against the seat, his tag glinting under the morning light like a secret daring to be told. Just as peace began to return, another knock shattered their fragile calm. This time it was not kindness that stood at their door, but fear. Oliver's biological father, Brian Dempsey, had found them. His presence was heavy, his voice bitter with regret and excuses. He spoke of rights, of second chances, but Grace saw only danger in his eyes. Charlie planted himself between Oliver's crib and the man's shadow, growling low, his body rigid with defiance. The days that followed were filled with tension, court hearings, legal battles, nights spent awake with dread. Yet through it all, Charlie remained steadfast. He barked at every sound, watched every corner of the house. He seemed to know that the threat lingered near, waiting for a chance to strike. At the courthouse, when the judge weighed their future, Grace spoke through tears, her voice unwavering. "Oliver is our son. We have given him love, stability, and life itself. And when silence nearly stole him, it was Charlie who saved him." The judge's gavel fell with finality. Full custody was granted to Grace and Tom. A restraining order was placed against Brian. The Millers left the courthouse with Oliver in their arms and Charlie at their side, the weight of fear lifting at last. Seasons shifted, but one truth never changed: Oliver and Charlie were inseparable. When Oliver learned to crawl, it was Charlie who crawled beside him. When Oliver pulled himself up for the first time, it was Charlie's fur he clung to. Step by fragile step, the little boy leaned on the little dog, each milestone a miracle born from loyalty and love. One evening, as the sun set in shades of orange and rose, the family sat together in the backyard. Oliver leaned against Charlie, his tiny hand resting on soft fur. "Love you, Charlie," he whispered in his sweet, unsteady voice. Grace's eyes filled with tears as she watched the scene unfold, a portrait painted in light and devotion. Tom slipped an arm around her shoulders. "Charlie isn't just a pet," he murmured. "He's family. He's a gift." The laughter of their son echoed in the fading light, blending with the quiet pant of the puppy who had never left his side. In that moment, Grace knew their story wasn't one of despair, but of resilience, of second chances, and of the miracle that had arrived in the form of a scruffy stray. Charlie had been more than their savior. He was proof that love can be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the smallest guardian can hold the greatest power. And so the miller's home, once filled with shadows, glowed with light, laughter, and the steady presence of a puppy who had become their miracle. The office was tucked above a quiet bookstore, its door marked only by a brass plate etched with a name, Dr. Laura Kane. Inside, the air carried the scent of lavender and old paper, a calm oasis away from the storm still dripping against the windows. Bookshelves lined the walls, stacked with volumes on veterinary science, animal psychology, and behavior studies. Dr. Kane herself rose from behind a wooden desk, her sharp eyes bright beneath dark hair streaked with silver. She extended a hand, her grip firm yet gentle. "Officer Hayes. Beth told me you might come." Shadow patted in first, nose twitching as he surveyed the room. He settled at Daniel's feet, though his amber eyes never stopped watching. Dr. Kane crouched, studying the dog's posture, his gaze, the way his body leaned ever so slightly toward Daniel. "He's attached to you," she observed. "More than most strays would be after such a short time." Daniel pulled the tag from his pocket and laid it on her desk. Its metal surface glinted under the lamplight, worn from years of touch. "This was buried with my dog. 3 years ago. I buried it myself. Yet here it is, around Shadow's neck." His voice cracked. "Explain that." Dr. Kane examined the tag with a precision that spoke of habit. She turned it slowly, then set it back down. "There are practical answers, of course. Graves disturbed by scavengers. Objects carried off. Accidents of chance." Daniel shook his head, jaw tight. "I buried Sam deep. The box was untouched, except the tag was gone. And then this dog shows up." Her expression softened, as though she had been here before with other grieving souls. Sometimes, the simplest explanations aren't the whole truth. Animals are more perceptive than we admit. They carry impressions of people, places, even other animals they've never met. In rare cases, we've documented something we call transference. Transference, Daniel echoed. It's when an animal adopts behaviors, habits, or even objects, belonging to another creature it has some unexplainable link to. Usually it happens between pets raised together. But there have been cases across time and distance. She leaned back, her gaze steady. Perhaps Shadow carries more than his own past. Perhaps he carries echoes of Sam. The word hung in the air like smoke. Daniel glanced down at Shadow, who looked back with unwavering devotion, ears tilting as though he understood every word. "But why the tag?" Daniel pressed, his voice low, urgent. "How could he have this? It doesn't make sense." Dr. Kane folded her hands. "Science cannot explain everything. Sometimes objects move through hands and homes in ways we'll never trace. Sometimes memory finds a vessel. You may never learn how the tag traveled from the grave to Shadow. But you know what matters. This dog found you." Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, a low growl echoing the turmoil in Daniel's chest. He rose, slipping the tag back into his pocket as though guarding a secret. Shadow stood too, leaning against his leg. Dr. Kane's voice followed him to the door. "You're not chasing coincidence, Officer Hayes. You're chasing connection. The question is, are you ready to accept it, no matter the cost?" Daniel didn't answer. The storm swallowed him as he stepped outside, but inside, a new storm had already begun to rage. Rain had stopped by morning, leaving the world hushed under a veil of mist. Daniel drove with Shadow beside him, the tag heavy in his pocket, Dr. Kane's words echoing like a refrain. Connection, not coincidence. Yet questions gnawed at him like restless teeth. If there was a link, where did it lead? His search through old rescue logs led him to a name scribbled on an adoption report: Megan Torres, a volunteer during the hurricane. She had once shared a blurry photo of Shadow online, back when he was called Lucky. In the image, the crooked tail and white chest patch were unmistakable. Daniel called her. Megan remembered immediately. Oh, Lucky. We pulled him from a property on the outskirts of town. Place was half destroyed, fences down, trees everywhere. He was scared, but it was like he was searching for something. An address. That was all Daniel needed. By afternoon he was standing at the edge of that property, Shadow's leash in his hand. The land was overgrown, a forgotten skeleton of what had once been a home. The porch sagged, weeds claimed the garden, and a rusted mailbox leaned at an angle. The name etched faintly on its side made his stomach lurch. Collins. Memories rose unbidden. Years ago, Sam had been obsessed with this property. He'd tug at his leash on walks, eager to play with Buddy, the black Labrador that belonged to the Collins family. Daniel remembered the cheerful woman who waved from her porch, the laughter of children, the sight of two dogs chasing each other across the yard. And then, suddenly, the family had vanished. Shadow stiffened, pulling him toward a collapsed shed. His paws scratched at the ground, a low whine building in his throat. Daniel knelt, clearing debris with trembling hands. Beneath rotted boards and vines, he uncovered a small rusted doghouse. Inside, half buried in dirt, lay another tag. He lifted it slowly, grime flaking away to reveal letters carved deep. The engraving was nearly identical to Sam's. Same shape, same design, even the same worn edges. His breath caught. He stared at Shadow, who sat close, watching him with eyes bright and unyielding. Two identical tags. One buried with Sam. One hidden here, in the ruins of the Collins life. The air seemed to pulse with a truth he could not yet name. Daniel turned the tag over in his hand, its cold surface buzzing with questions. Was this Buddy's? Had Shadow carried it from here all those years ago? Or had fate drawn Sam's memory into this place, binding the past to the present in a way no logic could untangle? The wind moved through the broken fence, a low whistle threading through silence. Shadow pressed against Daniel's side, tail brushing his leg as though urging him onward. This was no longer just about a dog with a familiar gaze. This was about a story interrupted, a thread between lives tangled by storms, fire, and loss. Daniel pocketed the second tag. The mystery had deepened, and so had his resolve. Somewhere between Sam, Shadow, and the Collins family lay the truth. He had to follow it, no matter how deep it buried itself in the ruins of yesterday. The next days blurred into late nights of research. Daniel hunched over his laptop with Shadow at his feet, the two tags laid out before him like relics demanding answers. He searched public records, old forums, anything that could resurrect the missing pieces of the Collins family's story. It wasn't long before fragments came together. A fire. A tragedy. The Collins house had burned just months before Sam's death. Their dog Buddy was listed among the lost, though rumors whispered he might have escaped. The family moved away in silence, leaving the property to decay. Daniel pressed deeper. He discovered that Mrs. Collins had once fostered dogs displaced by storms, volunteering at Golden Paws in its earliest days. His pulse quickened as he imagined it. Buddy lost, strays brought into her care, tags engraved by her careful hands. Was Shadow one of them? Was that why the tag designs matched Sam's so perfectly? Shadow stirred, ears flicking, as if he sensed the storm of thought. Daniel rubbed his head absently, then dialed the number for Golden Paws again. This time he asked not for records, but for someone who had known Mrs. Collins. Hours later, a call connected him to her son, Eric. On a video screen, Eric's face appeared, lined with years, his eyes carrying the same quiet kindness his mother had once shown from her porch. Daniel explained everything. Sam's grave, the missing tag, Shadow's uncanny resemblance, the second tag at the ruined property. As he spoke, Eric's expression shifted from confusion to something like awe. "That looks like one of my mom's," Eric said when Daniel held up the tag. "She used to engrave them herself for the dogs she fostered long-term. She believed every animal deserved a name, a mark of belonging. She kept journals too. Notes about each one." Hope sparked. "Do you still have them?" Daniel asked. Eric nodded slowly. "I'll check the archives. If your Shadow was once lucky, Mom would have written about him." That night Daniel could barely sleep. He sat with Shadow in the quiet of his living room, staring at the tags glinting under lamplight. The dog rested his chin on Daniel's knee, amber eyes reflecting trust and something deeper, something Daniel could almost believe was recognition. Days later, Eric called back, holding a worn leather notebook. He read aloud from a page. "Lucky, black mix, white chest patch, crooked tail. Found wandering near the storm-damaged property. Attached himself to a tag and collar belonging to another dog. Couldn't trace the owner. Gentle, resilient, seems to carry memories not his own." Daniel's breath caught. The journal had named him. Lucky. Shadow. The dog now asleep at his feet. And the note about the tag. It was proof that the mystery stretched beyond coincidence. As the words sank in, Daniel felt the walls between past and present thin. Sam. Buddy. Shadow. Collins. A storm, a fire, and a trail of lives woven together by fate. And for the first time, Daniel wondered if he was not just uncovering a mystery, but being led by it. Eric's words lingered long after the call ended. Daniel closed his eyes, hearing Mrs. Collins' careful script echo in his mind. A dog who carried memories not his own. A tag claimed like a talisman. A bond that refused to break even across storms and years. Shadow shifted at his feet, stretching before padding closer, pressing his head against Daniel's chest. The warmth of his body steadied him, grounding him in a truth that needed no science. Perhaps transference was real. Perhaps love had a way of planting itself in another heart, sprouting again when the time was right. Daniel decided to return once more to Sam's grave. Morning sunlight filtered through branches as he knelt beneath the oak, Shadow beside him. The stone's inscription glimmered faintly: partner, protector, friend, forever loved. He laid the second tag at the base of the stone. "I don't know how these pieces fit, Sam," he whispered, his throat tight. "But maybe that's not the point. Maybe you've been guiding me here all along." Shadow whined softly, nudging the tag with his nose before settling beside Daniel, as if paying respects. For a moment the air stilled, the rustle of leaves pausing like the world itself was listening. A breeze swept through, lifting Daniel's hair, carrying with it the faint scent of wildflowers and earth. It felt like an answer, not in words but in presence. He rose, a calm resolve filling the hollow space grief had carved years ago. He clipped Sam's old collar around Shadow's neck, fastening the tag with gentle hands. The silver disc caught the sunlight, glowing against dark fur. "There," Daniel said softly. "It looks perfect on you." Shadow barked once, tail wagging, eyes bright as if he understood. From that day forward, Daniel no longer searched for logic. Instead, he walked the trails Sam had once loved, Shadow always at his side. Together they visited old places, made new memories, and carried the legacy of loyalty and love that had never truly ended. Neighbors noticed the change in him. His sister said he seemed lighter. Strangers at the park spoke of the bond between officer and dog as though it glowed. And Daniel himself felt it too, the sense that Sam had not left him, only changed shape. One evening, as the sun burned gold over Willow Creek, Daniel sat on his porch with Shadow curled against his feet. He opened his journal and wrote, "Love does not vanish. It finds another way to stay. Sam's spirit runs beside me still, In Shadow's eyes, in his heart, in the silence between breaths. Perhaps that is the gift we are given, not to keep what we love forever, but to recognize it when it finds us again. He closed the journal, slipped it aside, and leaned down to press his forehead against Shadow's. "Thank you," he whispered, "for reminding me." The dog licked his cheek, tail thumping against the floorboards, and the night settled around them like a promise kept. For the first time in years, Daniel Hayes felt whole.